Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And today, my guest is Nick, one of my favorite people. I probably told you that to your face, but Nick Reinke is one of my favorite people. I've known him his whole entire life because his uncle and aunts are really good friends of mine from high school. And Nick now is, I don't even have a bio on you, Nick, so I'm going to ask you to tell us about that. But he's the CEO of an organization called HabiTerre, which we'll hear more about. Nick, thank you for taking the time to be with me today on Circle Up and Get Real.
Yeah, my pleasure. I have fun every time we talk, Jody. So it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. We do. We have fun when we talk because I think, Nick, you and I talk about things that a lot of people don't.
Yeah, completely agree.
You know, we can talk about business, we can talk about those kinds of things, but there's something deeper whenever we get together. And it's always been that way since I first really got to know you as an adult, back when you were the Chamber of Commerce president in Lisbon, North Dakota, our hometown. And you asked me to come and be a speaker for an event. And that, for a lot of reasons, there's more to that story that we can talk about at some point. I had some breakthroughs in my own life from that talk. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Nick, you have always seemed to me to be someone who knows who he is. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say I feel like I've certainly projected that over the years, but that is, as is the case with most of this stuff, right? That's a hard-fought journey, and there's always stuff going on behind the scenes as you figure that out. So I'd say every day I feel like I'm getting to a place where I know myself better than I did the day before. And that's, part of the work of it. But yeah, I've probably always been willing to maybe take a different perspective or not necessarily go along with a popular opinion. So I think that's the piece that you probably see there is just being willing to, be a little bit outside of the box always and stay as true as I can to who I am.
So in a little town, we're both from the same little town, rural community. Did you fit in? Were you popular in school? What was your high school journey like?
Yeah. It's been funny to hear over the years how, friends and different people that I've met perceived it versus how it was for me. Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you, for me, I mean, growing up, as is the case for a lot of kids, you have a lot of insecurities that you're working through. And, I was a chubbier kid growing up, and then I got tall and more athletic and all those fun things that go along with it. But the short answer to that, Jody, is, I found myself to be a social chameleon in a lot of ways. So as I grew and evolved and tried to figure out kind of how to get along with the other kids, I never did feel at home there. So while, the farm and Lisbon, North Dakota are my home and absolutely love the place that I came from, I never quite got it. I never felt like I really fit. So then the sort of mechanism by which I made that work was just adapting to those around me. So I found that I was in, the small towns could be kind of cliquey, right? So you've got the kids that are really studying hard, and you've got the athletes and the popular kids, and then maybe kind of the nerdier kids that are off playing video games on the weekends and stuff like that. And I found that I could pretty seamlessly move in and out of those various groups, and had a lot of very kind of diverse friends from those different groups. But I never felt at home, never really identified with any one of those groups. The identity always kind of spilled over across those various groups. So it was just kind of a Venn diagram kind of thing where there were some overlapping pieces, but no central circle where I really felt like I fit.
It's just going to be so funny. I have a feeling because we're going to have very similar stories about our own upbringing. I mean, a generation later, similar energy maybe from that town. And I can only speak for that town because it's my hometown. I don't know how to compare that to any other places or any other towns. But I felt similarly. And did that cause you to, when you went to college, to be more of what you knew yourself to be deep down? Or were you chameleoning? Is that even a word? Chameleoning? But when in college too?
Yeah, college was a real breakthrough for me. And I've got to really give credit to this incredible program that was at University of North Dakota for first year students that were going to be in some communications or maybe law or business track. So that was really a great opportunity for me to reinvent outside the context of the hometown and kind of the circles that you find yourself kind of pushed into. You get to show up on a new stage with new people, and you just get to be a little bit more who you are. But the thing that was so transformative for me in that first year program, it was called the Integrated Studies program. And I'm actually still good friends with the professor who put that together and was running it at the time, Dr. Tammy Carmichael up at the University of North Dakota. Just a terrific human being. But this program, it pulled together, it was about 90 of us students. It was all of your first year classes, getting all the one-on-ones out of the way. So it was this very integrated approach to these different topics, but it was approached in a really sort of philosophical way where we were really encouraged to play around with ideas and bounce them around and take different positions and debate them. So it wasn't just a, one directional data dump and then regurgitate onto a test. Like, we actually worked with the ideas and pulled them across domains into each other. So, our bio work would bleed right into some form of communications or English or lit. And it was just fascinating to see how that pulled together. And that what that really unlocked for me was this idea that, being a generalist and pulling ideas from different domains together is actually a superpower. So I think in education and in a lot of tracks, people are rewarded, especially in the hard sciences, for getting ever more specialized. Mm-hmm. And, it's almost like you have to apologize for being a generalist. And that's what that unlocked for me, is like, no, that's actually a beautiful thing to be able to pull those things together. And you can derive some really interesting insights by going across the different bounds of different domains.
Yeah. Well, what was your major when you got there?
Yeah, so I was planning on being a lawyer. So it was going to be pre-law track, and to that whole idea of identity and kind of people seeing some version of you and telling you what they see. My whole life, it was, oh, you're going to be a lawyer, and it was kind of because I loved to debate different topics as they came up, and I was not bad at it. So what I came to find out, though, was I was reading a bunch of John Grisham novels, and turns out actually being a lawyer isn't quite like the John Grisham courtroom argument. It's a whole lot of paperwork, and that's not something I love so much. Right. So that was a pretty quick shift once I started understanding the real world of law, kind of a couple of years into my undergrad. So from there, it was a business degree track that was more general, kind of more suited to what I was interested in. And it also just was more, I guess, universal or broadly applicable to a wide set of interests than going the legal track.
So when you shifted to business, did you have a vision of what you would be doing when you got that degree?
Man, I would love to tell the story that I, had a vision all along, but man, I had no idea who I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. All I knew was I loved growing up on the family farm. I loved the connection to agriculture, and I just loved the way that they approached the work, but I never wanted to be a farmer. That was never quite the fit, just because of, not feeling like I could fit on the farm, but also feeling like there's this huge world out there, and I was just so hungry to explore it. So that's the best premise that I had, was I'm kind of interested in the world of agriculture. Not sure how that's going to manifest. We'll get a business degree and go from there, because that's just what you do, right? You go from high school to either college or straight into a trade. And then from college, you go out and try and get a job. So yeah, I would say no designs on where it went. And it was sort of just lucky opportunities that came after that then I learned from and tried to make the most of.
So I love this so much, because I love how you said things bleed over in each other in this course that you took, or in this track that you were in. And when you realize that early in your life, and you see how interdisciplinary understandings of things can be used later. You probably didn't know this then, but where I am now in, toward the end of my career, I see the necessity of that even today, however many years later. And I love that you didn't know exactly what your vision was, because don't they tell you, you set a goal, go after the goal? That's what we're taught. That's how we're conditioned. That's how you and I were conditioned. Our parents are, your parents are my friends, and your parents, your grandparents were my parents' age. And so we were all kind of conditioned the same way. Yeah. And something shifted for you. I would bet at some point when you found yourself, you said lucky or fortunate or something like that, that you got a job. What was that process like for you, actually getting into the world of work after you graduated?
Yeah. There's another funny one. So I'll respond to one comment that you made there and then kind of back into that. So to your point on the sort of value of being an interdisciplinary thinker, that's one of my favorite things in my current role as CEO of HabiTerre. We're a scaling ag and environmental technology company. So we're doing some really cool stuff with world-leading, absolutely brilliant scientists like our founder, Dr. Kai Yuan. And it's a pleasure working with him. But one of my favorite compliments that I ever get from him is, he'll light up sometimes when we dig into something that's really deeply scientific and I'm able to work with it and then translate it into applicable business terms. And he just gets really excited because he doesn't find enough people that understand the depth of his work and yet can translate it into sort of real world action. But again, coming out of undergrad in 2007, could have never imagined in my, wildest days that in my 30s, I'd be, running an agricultural technology company that's working to make a real difference in climate change and the future of ag. So going back to that journey, it was really just kind of experimental in what was in front of me. So without getting too into the details of a few funny steps, I was working at Best Buy as a college job. So, full-time floor retail. And I actually kind of loved the organization of Best Buy. So my thought was, all right, I'm getting a business degree and I want to move up the chain in Best Buy. Cool. Let's go to, corporate and leadership. So as I was coming up to graduation, I was talking to Best Buy and they said, basically, there's no direct way for you to go from floor to upper management, even at a store level. And there's also no direct way to go from store to corporate. So you'd have to move around and potentially pursue these opportunities, but it was almost like there wasn't kind of a continuation of a career path in any clear way, which is very much what my expectation was. I didn't have much of a frame of reference coming from the farm, but I just thought corporate world, you go to work and you get promoted and you get promoted and you get promoted. And that's what a career looks like, right? So when that opportunity wasn't in front of me, I had a funny experience that a guy came in to buy a TV. I was in home theater. He's buying a TV and I'm just chatting him up as I do. And he goes, why are you working here? And maybe you should come work for me. And talk to me about this opportunity to be a finance manager at a car dealership. And I'm like, cool. Position that says manager, coming out of school, get paid a bunch more. Sounds great, right? So I just jumped on it. And went into a role as a finance manager at a car dealership there in Grand Forks. And what I quickly came to learn is finance manager was a fancy title for the guy that does the paperwork and gets the loans and tries to sell you the warranty, Which
is exactly what you didn't want to do.
Oh man, yeah, nobody likes that guy. Like you've already been there for a couple hours and now he's trying to drag you through paying more money for something and it's an hour more of paperwork and everybody just wants to get out of there at that point, right? So I got a taste of making some good money, which was fun, but it's like, ooh, I am not willing to trade, that much time and that much of my mental well-being and like enjoyment of what I do for really any amount of money. So I did that for a few months and my girlfriend at the time then got a job that was going to take her to Idaho. And I said, you know what? I'll figure it out. Like, let's go. I want to get the heck out of North Dakota. This job isn't working for me. So followed her to Idaho in that process. And there again, I was still just kind of operating on base assumptions of how life evolves. So, you go to school, you get a career, you get a girlfriend, you get serious, you get engaged, you get married. Like it's just, you envision it as this very linear path. So took what I thought was a logical step. We moved in together, got engaged. Given that I didn't really have a very mature outlook on the world at that time, I'll admit that I was probably not a great partner, and that did not go very well for us. So that's where, got a job in insurance in Idaho. Was my first taste in the insurance world. And then frankly, as things didn't work out there, I came back to the farm with my tail between my legs, having learned some hard lessons on, what the life journey might look like. So anyway, credit to my dad for just being willing to let me experiment and then fall back on the farm when I kind of failed at that experiment.
Yeah.
And, worked on the farm for a bit, and it's like, all right, this is not a long-term solution. We all kind of knew that I wasn't going to stay on the farm. And shortly thereafter, my dad's local crop insurance guy, who worked at Bremer Bank, local bank there in Lisbon, he came out. He was getting towards retirement, was looking for somebody who understood ag, maybe from the community, who also knew insurance. And turns out I kind of checked all those boxes a little bit by happenstance, and ended up basically apprenticing under him as that next job. And I just moved progressively through the ranks there at Bremer over the next, better part of 10 years. So that was kind of the journey of, that's what it looks like to not really have a plan in undergrad. And learn some lessons from that.
And I love that whole thing about that, because learned some lessons from that, found out that it wasn't exactly the way you kind of just assumed it would happen. Momentum takes us in a certain direction sometimes, and we just assume it's going to all work out. And at some point you said I wasn't mature enough and I wasn't a great partner. Things learned in that way too. The maturity that can happen through things that we might consider, or others might consider, failures, are crucial to actually finding out what you do desire instead. And so when you came back and you learned a lot of things through that circuitous journey, I want to talk about when I came into the picture. When you and I connected after this event that you had me speak for, we had that conversation at the coffee shop about what you really wanted to do at that point. Do you remember that conversation when we were talking about politics?
Yeah, talking about politics and talking about just making a difference at your scale, kind of broader stage kind of thing. Yeah.
You occurred to me in that conversation as someone who was so confident and so not cocky. And to me, I didn't know there was a huge distinction in my career journey. It was all cocky or subdued. And so what I got from you in that conversation was a new way to look at somebody who, I'm going to just call you out on this for a second, who said, I could probably do anything I want to. You said that. You said, I have the opportunity in my life to do whatever I want. And you said this, Nick, I don't know if you remember this, but you said, I could be the president of the United States if I want to be.
Yeah, probably a bold statement there. Lots and lots of things that need to happen to make that possible. But yeah, I mean, it's not lost on me, the good fortune that I've had in my life. Like, school came relatively easily, and just credit to my parents for a great upbringing and being grounded in hard work. And that was a big thing for Dad. He just detested arrogance, but at the same time, he was an incredibly confident guy. Like, he knew what he knew, and he knew that he knew it. So he knew where his confidence and his security came from, but he never beat anybody over the head about it. And he never lorded that over anybody, which is something I really respected and tried to emulate in my own way. So I'll say today, I don't think I could be the president of the United States, and I don't necessarily want to. But, there's still something in there that you do get faced with this paradox of choice. And then you have to really get to a point of saying, what's really meaningful for me, and like, what's the best way for me to show up in the world, right? Like, what can I do to create positive impact, but in a way that also aligns with what energizes me, right? Because you can set off on a mission to create some sort of impact, but if it's not aligned with your own personal mission and what charges your batteries, you're not going to be successful doing that. So it's kind of finding that personal mission alignment with kind of where the world or where the universe is telling you should show up.
Yeah. And so you did that, and you demonstrated that, because your next step, as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong here, was an MBA. you were like, I want to get an MBA and I have some pretty high aspirations of where I want to go and get that. I had the privilege of writing a letter for you. So talk about that process when you decided that, hey, this Bremer thing is great and now something new. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, we talked at a really interesting time when we got together because, I'd had, more success in a number of ways than I expected to at that stage of my career. So at that time, I think I was, vice president of the agency, and I just had an experience where it was just a really, really good financial year. You get into commission business and like you have your ups and downs, but like the money was good. And I'm living in, North Dakota. So it's not like the cost of living is very high. So what struck me was I'd kind of checked all of these boxes that I had laid out for myself that defined career success the way that I understood it. So it was, title and money and freedom and autonomy and all those things. And I was so fortunate as to have achieved a lot of those pretty early on. So I built this version of what looked like a successful life, settled down and got married and just thought, okay, and then the wake up call for me was, number one, that really good financial year. What struck me was the money didn't feel any different. Incremental financial improvements, they don't feel any different. It doesn't materially great. It's the freedom that it buys you, but it doesn't materially change your day-to-day experience of life. It doesn't make you happier, and that's an obvious conclusion that millions of people before me have realized. But in some ways, I just had to see that for myself. And the wake-up call at that point was, man, look at the calendar. Like, am I going to do this for the next 35 years of my life? The planet is on fire functionally, and I see few things that are more, material to our generation, especially, just looking at the time scale of humanity. I was starting to appreciate longer term history at that point. Like, few times in human history has there been an opportunity to make a real meaningful difference at an incredible scale like there is in climate change. Like, it is the problem of this generation, really, that action needs to be taken in a really meaningful and scaled way. So that's what kind of struck me, is like that started to form as a personal mission of like, that would be really meaningful to me. And agriculture has a huge role to play in that work. And agriculture is also going to be a victim of some of the major impacts of climate change, like changing weather patterns and stuff like that. And I saw, family farm and everybody that I knew back home, like they were going to struggle with that, with more extreme weather coming. So that's what put me in the right mindset. But again, it's the little catalysts that, you don't realize until kind of in retrospect. So what actually made the move happen is like, that's the mindset that I was in. But then one of those aunts and uncles that you talked about, my Aunt Deb, always like a second mom, just a wonderful sort of guidepost and mentor and somebody that I looked up to. She knew this, like she saw this in me, saw that conflict. She came across an article about, it was Stanford at that time. So it was the Stanford Midwest Fellowship Program. And it was basically, if you're from the Midwest and kind of, Midwest values, is an opportunity to get a full ride to a Stanford MBA. And I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty incredible. The least I can do is take a shot, Yeah. So that's where I actually went and applied to that. But lo and behold, Stanford's kind of hard to get into, right?
Yeah.
I'll admit, the timeline was short, so the application, it wasn't half-baked, but it certainly wasn't fully baked. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get selected there, but the outcome of that was an opportunity that ended up being better than I could have hoped for, that I ended up then connecting with Johns Hopkins University, and, basically was awarded the same deal. So it was, fellowship, school was covered, some cost of living stipend. And that came together in such a way that I think there are a lot of other pathways where I might have gone incremental, kept working the safe job and got an MBA on the side and decided what I wanted to do. But that was just one of those signals that I couldn't possibly ignore. So that made for a much bigger change and frankly, a transformation for me individually to get to pursue that.
Yeah. So you went to Baltimore. You were there for, what was it, a couple of years?
Yeah, about 2.5 years, 2017 to 2019. Yeah.
And you traveled and you met people and you were a mover and shaker in that program.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was kind of like undergrad, right? It was this new opportunity. So I had this identity that I built over the last 10 years as, basically crop insurance and ag banking, and, settled in, involved in the community, right? Like you said, Chamber of Commerce and a couple other boards, and like, volunteer fire department, all that stuff. And that was all great. But yeah, when I went to Hopkins, it was a whole new batch of people that had absolutely no context other than who is this random farm boy from North Dakota that's
Who,
now
by the way, is like, how tall are you?
like 6'7". So
So
yeah.
Nick stands out in a crowd, I'm just gonna say.
Yeah, so it was a funny experience to go and meet with this group, and like our class was truly international. So the composition of the class, they called it a global MBA, and half the class was from countries all over the world, and the other half of the class was US based. So even amongst the US based crowd, I was kind of an anomaly because a lot of people come from big cities of the coast, but then especially in that context, it was just a full reset amongst a basically global community. So it's really fun to play with identity in that context too.
Yeah. And that then led you to this position. Did I miss anything in the middle there?
So a couple of steps that went along with that. It didn't, like you said, I talked to a bunch of people. So I was still trying to figure out, I had this really high level, sustainability, agriculture, climate, somewhere in there, really mission driven. So like I need to be with an organization that's trying to do it for real, not just doing it for PR.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted to do it at scale. So there are some really incredible organizations out there that are, sticking to their idealistic nature, but then you have sort of this perfect little commune on 1,000 acres, but you're not making an impact globally. And then the other side of the spectrum that I saw was global organizations that didn't really want to change their business models necessarily. And sustainability was a threat as much as an opportunity. So then you'd look at those and you'd say, that's kind of the spectrum. So do any organizations exist in between that, where it's, large enough organization to make an impact at scale, but yet willing to be a little idealistic and keep, the farmer and optimal outcomes in mind. So lots of networking with lots of different organizations to understand that landscape. And that's what brought me to TruTerra, actually, the role that I had prior to joining HabiTerre here. So at TruTerra, sustainability business of Land O'Lakes, what I found there is farmer-owned cooperative, 100-year-old Fortune 200 company, really just great culture, great ethos there that I saw. And like they actually really wanted to do things that were beneficial to the farmers, and corporate ownership structure like that, it matters, right? So that's where I went to TruTerra, and I was there for a couple of years, just working in, scaling sustainable agriculture and in this kind of evolving emissions claim and carbon credit space, right? So it was an incredible opportunity to just see what was that experience like for farmers, and what did they see in this emerging environmental market, but then the companies that are trying to work with farmers towards their climate goals, right? Like a big corporation that's sourcing agricultural products into their products. They're making these big global climate commitments, and then somehow they need to work with farmers to influence practices and then be able to, talk about the environmental benefits of those practices and their footprint. Or the other exciting piece was we worked with Microsoft, and, kind of mind blowing for me as a farm boy to say, all right, so we just had a deal with Microsoft where, as part of Microsoft's climate commitments, they're paying farmers to store carbon in the soil through their farming practices, right? And that was just mind-blowing. Is like, okay, this is a business model that can actually exist. Like you get farmers paid for good stewardship of the land. Like that is such an unlock for me, that was just kind of incredible that, that's a mechanism for change. Like it doesn't have to be all philanthropic. Like there's an opportunity for this to be kind of a win-win in the context of, a system of capitalism, right?
Right.
Yeah, you can make that work. You can make it make sense for farmers and for the companies that are pursuing climate targets.
So conscious capitalism, you were introduced to it without even recognizing that there was such a thing as conscious capitalism, profit with a purpose, all of those things that I believe exist and don't always have an opportunity to see in my work, but I read about that. So I love that you are actually in that, because HabiTerre was developed, right? I mean, this is a startup.
Yeah. So HabiTerre is a startup, and I would be remiss if I didn't give credit to Hopkins Carey Business School on this too, real quick, is the conscious capitalism piece. That's where I say it was actually really fortunate that it ended up being there, as opposed to another place I could get the MBA, because at that time, now I think things have shifted for them since strategically, but at that time, their tagline was doing business with humanity in mind. So it was actually that kind of conscious capitalism was interwoven into the degree. So that probably primed me for really understanding the opportunity at Truterra there. But yeah, what brought me to HabiTerre was during the work at Truterra, what became evident there was it was a lot of like heavy manual data gathering and technologies to quantify environmental outcomes for agriculture. Like they left a lot to be desired. And, we saw that firsthand at Truterra. So that organization, very mission driven around the farmer. But what was clear was these marketplaces for that conscious capitalism in ag, they were absolutely not going to scale without advances to technology to create that infrastructure to make that feasible, right? And there again, that learning had to be primed at the right time. That when I met Dr. Kaiguan, the founder of HabiTerre, got to talk to him, and I said, "Oh man, this guy's like he built the technology. He's done the research to help create that infrastructure in a really meaningful way that I hadn't seen from any other organization." So then Kaiyu and I, no surprise, philosophically hit it off. And as we get to talking, he said, I'm scaling this startup, launched a couple of years ago, very science-based, but would really like to have somebody who understands this realm and this world of agriculture come in and help commercialize and scale it. So that's what brought me to the team just a little over a year ago, kind of early 2022. I joined Kaiyu and the team, and we've been just building the company ever since.
Yeah. Wow, there's just so many places to go here. You keep saying that I happen to be in the right place at the right time. Things happen to work out. It feels like it's kind of lucky. I don't believe it's luck. I believe that there's a higher purpose. I believe that there's more here. And I knew that the first time we had that conversation at the coffee shop. I just didn't know how to articulate it. But there's a spiritual dimension to everything you're talking about without really saying it. And there's something greater at play here in my observation of your journey. I think we could go down a road. We could talk about politics. We could talk about a lot of things that are impacting your organization as well. I'm betting. I mean, are you a for-profit or not for-profit?
Yeah, we are for-profit.
For-profit. Okay. So grants and those kinds of things aren't as necessary as if you were a not-for-profit. So
more than you think, actually. Like there's a lot of grant funding that can actually be applied, especially to impact-driven work. So that's where we kind of bridge both arenas where, again, getting back to that conscious capitalism, right? Like philanthropic efforts are great and absolutely necessary. And there's a certain sort of ethos and alignment that goes along with that. But at the same time, if you're really trying to drive rapid impact for scale, one of the best mechanisms to do that is actually companies that have some sort of a profit motive, but it's aligning that profit motive with a cause. So just by being a for-profit organization doesn't necessarily remove you from being a cause-oriented organization at the same time.
Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Sometimes it's easy to get cynical and jaded when you see a world that the loudest voices are not the ones you want to hear. And media, we could go down a whole rabbit trail here. I don't choose to do that because this podcast is about being real, which is to me, radical, energized, authentic, and learning focused. And when we get radical, we go back to the root. So I don't think of radical as wild and crazy out there. What are the things I need to deal with? It's like what we've been talking about, going back to the root, the radish, the root vegetable. The root of us, I think, is goodness. I believe as human, you mentioned humanity built into your program, that I believe will win in the end over the fear and the ego and all of the posturing that the world seems to want to pull us into. And you are, in my opinion, one of the true leaders in this realm. You're headquartered in Minneapolis, is that right?
The team is actually based in Champaign, Urbana. So Minneapolis, the Truterra days, with Land O'Lakes there. And now Caillou and the science team are at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So we've got a core concentration there, but that's been an interesting thing that was unlocked by, COVID and everybody learning to work virtually. As I was able to connect with Caillou, I was able to stay in Minnesota, kind of at the beginning there, and we were able to work together. So we've been building a pretty geographically distributed team, just looking at, the best talent and cultural alignments and things like that as we go to hire people. So concentration of the team, they're in Illinois, but a number of talented folks kind of around the country.
And that gives you the flexibility, a person like you, the flexibility to live where you want so that your lifestyle can be in alignment with who you are as a human. Again, going back to the humanity of things. I think sometimes we get caught up in the resource part of the human resources and we forget that human comes first. And so I love that you are doing that. I mean, you're the CEO. So what is your vision for your organization?
Yeah.
Small little question there.
Yeah. Of course we do a lot of thinking and talking about that at the organization. And that the vision is something that I'm playing with right now actively, is why I'm not giving you a super concise statement on it, because this is one of the things that I was looking forward to talking with you about today, is kind of personal vision versus how is that vision perceived. And then honestly, for me, certain judgments come up with certain visions, either, who are you to have that vision? How dare you aspire so high? Or, is this a vision that really is compelling to the team? So the vision for us, and the vision that I'm most excited about, is really, I believe that we need to compensate farmers for the good stewardship that they do on the land. And we need to help farmers adapt to this changing climate that we're in. And there are a lot of people talking at farmers today, and there's a lot of shortcomings to the infrastructure to make these markets possible. So getting to a finer point on it, I mean, the vision for us is to really build the infrastructure that makes it possible for farmers to get rewarded, not just for their production, but for their good stewardship of the land as well, right? So that's really the true vision, is to build that infrastructure, because this market doesn't happen without good infrastructure to make that possible, right? But the piece that I'm talking about on the struggle side, so coming from a farming background, there are a lot of entities out there that are coming at the farmer and saying, oh yeah, we're here for the farmer, we're here to help you. And the level of authenticity is a wide range, to say the least, right? And that's one thing that I'm incredibly sensitive to, is I don't want to come to farmers and say, hey, we're going to solve all your problems, because we're not. Nobody is. That is not a single entity's job. And it is just incredibly patronizing to think that we can understand every individual farm and every individual set of needs and tell them how we're going to fix it for them. Like, I look at our family farm, my brother's fourth generation back there. Like, this is many, many decades of deeply knowing their land and their needs and how different it is to the next operation right next door, let alone to an operation across the country. So that's where that authenticity piece is really, really critical to me, that I don't want to be going out there with a vision that is inauthentic and going to just ring false for the people that we are actually really trying to help, the farmers in this. So that's where I think I grapple a little bit with the infrastructure idea, that it feels a little disconnected, right? And that's one of the personal drivers for me, is I love being connected to farmers and like seeing positive impact on farm. So it's continuing to be driven by this mission and vision, even though it's maybe not like I'm not out there boots on the ground working with the farmer, but I know that for the market to work in their favor, HabiTerre needs to help build that infrastructure, right? Needs to help create confidence and transparency in these marketplaces, because to get farmers rewarded, the market has to work. Right.
Do they, this is a weird question, but I think over time, over generations, your point about the fourth generation, and we know what we're doing, we're good, can be really positive. It's digging your heels into what you know. And it can also prevent new ideas from being introduced because we don't need that in our backyard. I think sometimes can be a really interesting juxtaposition of possibilities. How do you see that happening with your brother, for example? North Dakota, we're pretty hardy. We don't need any newfangled stuff coming at us from other parts of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's a thing when, I'm talking to colleagues or customers or anything like that. Like I laugh about going back home and, getting slapped in the face with reality kind of thing. So I come back and I'm all spun up on, hey, these climate markets and advances to ag tech and all this exciting stuff, right? We're going to change the world. And they laugh and say, oh, yeah, that's cute. Here's what I actually care about on the farm. And this is at best a footnote, right? And they're right. That's kind of the truth of it. So number one, I don't think the case in environmental markets is quite compelling enough or being delivered in a clean enough way. And again, that gets back to infrastructure, right? Like we can do better on how these markets work and how we reach farmers. But on top of that, I think we need to be just realistic about exactly what you're talking about, like theories of change and how farmers change. And what you'll find is, should be no surprise, not every farmer is the same, right? Just right. Human is the same. So it becomes this spectrum of, there are farmers that are really ready to have this conversation. So they're the innovators. They're the ones that, with or without our help, they were going to be really aggressively at the leading edge of innovation. So those farmers, I would say, are largely the ones that are engaging with these environmental markets today, because they're the folks that were kind of going to do it anyway. You didn't need to influence them to get that done. Then you get into that next sort of innovation tranche, if you will. So you go from the really leading edge innovators to kind of those early adopters. They're watching what the innovators do, but prove it. It needs to make sense before I'm going to jump on. And those are the folks that are engaging the conversation, but still trying to figure out what it means to them. So that's one of the things, is just kind of democratizing that information, helping them understand, what does this climate market or the environmental market mean to you? How is it relevant to your farm? And that's one of the things that we do, is get right down to like a farm field level and say, based on your actual field, your actual history, like, here's what these practice changes might mean for you. So rather than it being kind of a broad brush, this is what it means for all farmers, trying to make it personally relevant. But the truth is, all the tools in the world like that are not going to reach, it wasn't that long ago that my grandpa was still involved in the farm. Yeah. And grandpa and dad have both actually since passed, but for both of those guys, there was near zero chance of engaging them in this conversation in the climate market, even though they were doing great work to be good stewards of the land. It just seemed, outside the scope for them. And like you said, they didn't want to be told what they should be doing. So it's a little bit generational. It's a little bit down to the nature of the individual as well. But it's recognizing, like, it needs to be locally, individually relevant to be meaningful. Otherwise you're not going to reach anybody with a broad blanket message.
Yeah. I'm going back over our conversation today about what puts you as, take your ego out of this, but what puts the human Nick Reinke in the right place at the right time. I mean, if you look back on history, there probably are these times in history when something just came together. The fact that your journey was the way it was in generals, that allowed you to kind of take everything and put it together. The fact that you love connecting, the fact that you're an extrovert, you see, it seems to me, you see patterns and you see how things can work together. You had pretty unique opportunities to learn global issues from a little farm in North Dakota, so all of these things that the person who is Nick Reinke has been put in place to impact seems to be a perfect fit right now. Would you say that, if you could take yourself out of it and kind of observe it?
It really does feel that way. And I think that's probably why you hear me talk so many different ways about just like gratitude and feeling fortunate, lucky, whatever. Like it's certainly partially due to how you show up in the world, but it is, finding yourself to be fortunate enough to find that right match of who you are and the work that you get to do. So yeah, there's nothing, I don't feel like there's anything particularly special that I as an individual do. It's more so like being able to see the full picture and understanding, okay, who do we need here? What do we need? How do we pull the pieces together? Because again, it's just way too big of a problem to solve as any one individual or entity. So that's where it's so compelling for me to partner with Caillou at the company here. Is Caillou is just a brilliant scientist in ways that I will never even begin to comprehend, right? But I see the need for leading edge science and passionate researchers and developers and people who want to see their science applied to the real world. Like that's one piece that you need. Another piece that you need is the ability to talk to the farmer. And again, I'm not going to be the guy going out and talking to farmers, but I do know what that looks like and how that's best iterated on. And like, I understand some of the entities that are best at it. So there are great farm advisors that are out in the field today. So it's figuring out, how we work with existing farm advisory channels. So yeah, to your point, it's the connector piece, but having enough context to understand, how the connections fit together to make it all work.
Yeah. And that feels sort of like a gift you have. I mean, it's probably not a combination of skills that everybody could pull together so seemingly seamlessly, and in that for your space. And that's why I keep saying right now, because you are a guy who I think has, you're open to whatever the universe or God or whoever is going to lead you to, because this is a pretty big place we live in. And the globe needs help, and I don't think either of us would argue with that there are a lot of issues right now that make our world a really messy place, that given the skill set that you have, I think, your nature doesn't occur. It's confident, not cocky. And I'll say that again, not ego. Like this is about me. This is about we. And that's how I see you finding this opportunity, because you were always looking for something that had global impact. And when you said, I'm a little muddled about, is my vision too big? And we can have that conversation in a separate conversation. Nick, keep dreaming big, because your example, who you are, just not even what you do, who you are is an example for others around you. The fact that you met, I can't say his name, but your partner in this, you've rattled it off really quickly. Where's he from?
Caillou? Yeah.
Where's he from?
Originally from China, came to the US, got his PhD at Princeton, postdoc at Stanford. Now he's at the University of Illinois. Just an incredible human being. Yeah.
So the fact that you connected, right? You fell into the place with him is just so divine to me. There's just so much more at play here when we can pull ourselves out and look at the bigger picture, as you're so good at doing. So is there anything I can do to support you, Nick, and what you're up to and what our listeners might be able to do?
Yeah, well, I deeply appreciate it. You are always too kind, Jody. And the feeling's mutual. That's why we have these conversations. I just really appreciate the way that you show up in the world. So for us, it's of course we're trying to grow a business here, right? But it's really about that cultural and philosophical alignment is really, really important, because that's how you connect these dots and actually get everybody rowing in the same direction. So even if the ultimate business goal sounds the same, you find that you end up rowing against each other sometimes. So the biggest thing for me, and especially for kind of folks that you reach, is, as much as we have an incredible team, and I love being that kind of central connector trying to pull it all together, like it gets isolating sometimes. So sometimes it's nice to have just a network of people that you can bounce ideas around with and talk about the hard things and talk about where you're stuck and that kind of thing. And that's one of the things that probably leave us with here is, one place that I struggle frequently is, because I'm so mission and cause oriented here, you find that you connect with a number of other individuals that are really excited about another cause, and there's this temptation to really be passionate about all of the things, you know,
Yeah.
like you said, there's so many problems that the world faces. And it's like, yeah, we need to do better in education and equity and poverty and international relations and all of these things. And I just had to kind of get okay with having the things that I am really, really dedicated to, and still very much support all other initiatives to make the world a better place. But, you know, you kind of got to be gentle with yourself and say, I can't be passionate about all of the things. There's only a finite amount of time and energy that a person has. So figure out what really lights your fire and go after that, and go after that unapologetically. Like, really dedicate is so much more powerful than, you know, just kind of trying to do all the things, whether or not you're really committed to it.
That's so great. That's so great that you learned that at this stage of your life, because some of us, you know, took way too long to pick a lane and, you know, stay in the lane, and realize that other people who will pick the lanes will take care of their lanes as well. And so that's a really good thing to recognize. So if people wanted to get a hold of you, Nick, or find you, what would be the best way? Or do you prefer to be anonymous?
Yeah, no, happy to connect with, you know, if this conversation resonates with people, very happy to connect. So for me, email for me is Nick, Nick .Reinke, Reinke at HabiTerre.com, HabiTerre.com. And our website is HabiTerre.com. So definitely go check us out there too.
That's awesome. Nick, thank you. It is a pleasure as always. And I just really appreciate what you're doing. I love watching you. I love observing you, and just keeping in touch. So thank you for being with me today.
It's my pleasure, Jody. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. And as always, everybody, get real. Talk to you again. Bye. Okay.